He came across as a nationalist, selfless, incorruptible and fearless, and a disciplinarian. As the nation bids Flight Lieutenant Jerry John Rawlings farewell, some of his classmates from Mrs. Sam School at Nima and Achimota say he stood up for the defenseless and became a voice for the voiceless, even at a very young age. But beyond the uncompromising face was a man full of humor and never rejected a dish of kinky and fish. Former Chief of Defense Staff Brigadier General retired Joseph Nunu Mensah and a few close friends tell us more.
In this exercise, you're testing some new cars, armored cars we have bought. And he was flying one of the planes that were given what we call in the military close air support. They would come and bomb the enemy across the river, and it was a military operation. One of the pilots was flying almost on the top of the trees. Very scary. So I said, who is this crazy pilot? I mean, behaving as if he didn't care for his own life. So at the end of the exercise, I tried to find who he was. And I got to know it was this Flight Lieutenant Rawlings. That I began to take interest in him because his bravery no, I've never seen it like this before.
Jerry stood out in the class, not because he was a naughty boy or notorious boy, but he seemed to do things his way, in the sense that he loved to ask the teachers questions. And the questions came, now I'm an adult, I can analyze them easily. They came in three different types. One was a straightforward question. The second was the kind of question that would stump the teacher. And then the third type of question was when he would do his thing, you know, like his acting, his arms all over the place and his face and things. And it would be a rambling question. But because of those questions, the class got to notice him, that he was different from the rest of us. You know, he was noticed by the teachers.
He was very charming, very laid back, and pensive at times. You weren't sure what was going through his mind.
It was a joy flying with Jerry Rawlings because he would always maintain his position. Because the thing is that follow your leader, and he will always follow and get glued to his position.
He was sending a message to ordinary Ghanaians that we don't have to wait for the IMF, for the World Bank. We have what it takes to rescue ourselves from this morass, and that's what he did.
Well, his body has been laying in state at the Accra International Conference Center. Let's take you there, where JoyNews editor Araba Kumsin has been monitoring activities relating to the funeral of the former president. Araba, what can you report? We're told that the body of the late president was conveyed to the center as early as 5 a.m.
Since the crack of dawn, I mean, we've been here as the former president's body was laid in state for members of the public to come and pay their last respects. In fact, today, earlier in the morning, members of the NDC as well as the MPP, leadership of those two political parties, were here to pay their last respects. And so it's been a somber mood throughout, because obviously this is a man who was loved by the people, described by many as an icon and a man of the people. This was someone who, speaking to a lot of people, a lot of things that they say, one thing stands out, that he was a man of the people. He was someone who desired to bridge the gap between the rich and the poor, and that can never be forgotten. So earlier today, we had the leadership of the NDC, as well as members, the grassroots members, coming in their numbers to pay their last respects. And a lot of them talk about the principles that he espoused, and those are probity and accountability. We all know those principles. It's very, very common now for most of us. But for many of them, we need to instill these in our governance structure, because that is what is missing in our governance structure. That is what Mr. Rawlings came to espouse, to change the democratic system. But it seems that we are going back rather than, moving forward. And so we've been here since the crack of dawn when the body was brought here. There was tight security here. COVID protocols were strictly enforced. In fact, they don't allow media men to go inside the foyer where the body is laid. And so we are expected to, beam the pictures from a media village right behind me. But generally, it's been a somber mood. People come here, they go in there, look at the body, and emerge with tears in their eyes. Some screaming and crying because they still are in shock and cannot believe that this colossal figure is gone, finally. But I've been speaking to some members of the NDC, most of whom we don't hear from nowadays, but most of whom work closely with former President Rawlings. And what they tell me is that he was a tax master. He was someone who held you to high esteem and expected you to work at your highest. I spoke to Hudiyaya. I spoke to Hudiyaya, who was a former secretary during the PNDC era, as well as Kofi Totobi Kwache, who was the information minister during the Rawlings administration and later became the national security minister, the first national security minister. And they've all been talking about the need for us to espouse the principles of probity and accountability, for which Mr. Rawlings will forever be remembered for.
Environment within which J. Rawlings emerged. And in a period of about 10 years, he managed, under his leadership, things changed in this country for the better. And it set this country on the path of good governance, of economic stability, of political stability. And what we have today is a credit to the leadership that he provided this country. And I walk in there and I see Jerry lifeless. It reminds you that everything has an end. For a man who was so active, so buoyant, to see him in this state, I know that all of us at some point will go, but nobody fathomed that Jerry will go at this time. And sad as many of us are, I also think that that he's accorded this respect, he's accorded this honor, and that people are now speaking out in appreciation of what he did. It proves the saying that posterity is what will judge us all. Because when I listen to some of the people who in the past had demonized him, people who had referred to him as a murderer, people who misunderstood circumstances or issues that had arisen and were easily described him in unpalatable terms, that today I sit back and I hear them talk in such effusive terms about how good he was, what a good person, leader he was, this thing. I say it's a lesson for all of us. Don't let us rush to judgment.
It's interesting you talk about that, because even as we mourn him today, we are also celebrating him. For you, what is the legacy he leaves behind?
For me, the legacy he has left behind is the stability that this country is enjoying. There was a time when coup d'etats were the order of the day. And I remember on 31st December 1981, one of the announcements that was made following the takeover was that this is the coup that will end all coups. And I think those words, those prophetic words were uttered by then Naval Captain Asasi Jima. And truly, we started, there were issues, there were attempts, etc., etc. We prevailed, Ghana prevailed, and today we talk about Ghana as the bastion of democracy. Today we talk about Ghana as an example of stability. Today we talk about Ghana as one of the finest examples of economic development and progress. I think that Jerry has gotten the honor that he deserves.
I'm sure a lot of memories are going through your mind as you see the lifeless body of the former president lying there. What are some of those memories?
Well, it's a very sad day for the nation. JJ was such a huge figure in our whole political scene. And as I said in my tribute, you know, when a man attains such a huge stature, we get very used to it and imagine that somehow the laws of biology wouldn't work with him. So, but it is sad that it happened, and happened so suddenly. I think that the nation will remember him as someone who was so dearly loved, especially by the ordinary man who saw in him someone who really spoke for the ordinary person, and someone who provided leadership, very critical leadership, at a time when the nation was almost literally on the brink of total social disintegration, and provided leadership, especially in the area of economic policy transformation, and leadership in helping us take decisions that needed to be taken, even though they were painful and cost him some political, some of his political liking, and so I do very much hope that the cardinal principles that he stood for, probity, accountability in public life especially, will be taken seriously. These are all values that it would appear are being eroded with time, but I hope that this will provide a certain reawakening of the whole nation to appreciate, the true values of the probity and accountability that he so much cherished.
Now, Mr. Rawlings has been credited for turning the economy around at a time when it was in a dire state, and you were pivotal in that and very instrumental at the time. So tell me, what do you remember about working with him during that time?
Well, the most difficult problem we had at the time was to change our policies in the area of our exchange rate management. The cedi had been pegged at 2.75 cedis to a dollar for a very long time. Everybody knew that this wasn't the true value of the cedi in dollar terms, but all our political leaders, and frankly, every government that had tried to realign relative prices and to touch the peg that we had established for the cedi to a dollar had met with some political misfortune. So it took a lot of courage. And JJ, I worked under him for 13 years. I was his minister. And I know firsthand the kind of leadership that he provided at some political cost to himself in taking those policies and in shifting our stance on the exchange rate management and gradually allow the exchange rate to be market determined rather than administratively determined. And it provided a foundation, a real foundation for the institutional changes that needed to be made to make this economy what it is today. We take a lot of things for granted today, the forest bureaus and all that, the stock exchanges and all that.
Well, that's Araba's conversation there with Professor Butchie. Well, she's also been speaking with Hudu Yaya, former PNDC secretary.
Yes, and Rawlings will want justice from the coast to the north. No discrimination. The country's resources belong to all. So for us as a country, a people occupying public positions should not tolerate ethnicity or tribalism in the negative sense. No, don't. Don't discriminate against others because of where they come from or because of the language they speak. Don't discriminate against people because of which religion they practice. We are all Ghanaians. That's first and foremost. After that, whatever anybody does, that's his problem. This is what I learned about Rawlings.
From the interviews that I've conducted this morning of the leadership of the NDC and other members of the NDC, what stands out a lot is the core principles of probity and accountability which he drove. Do you think that is still alive in the party now? It's alive.
It's alive. It's alive. As human beings, we can never be perfect. As a society, we can never be perfect. But there's always room for improvement, and that is what keeps society going. The NDC will cease to be NDC if those values are lost in NDC.
I asked that question because Mr. Rawlings himself, before his death, had cause to complain about the fact that these principles were not being upheld in the party.
Well, I don't remember which particular occasion you are talking about. But the point is that even though I don't remember, even though I don't know which particular quotation you are making, I don't know which particular quotation you are making, but I want to say that no society is ever perfect. At least we were better than where we came from. At least after June 4th, something has been integrated into our society. That if you are given any public leadership and you are going to do what is not right, you are going to be corrupt, at least you will be looking at your back. You wouldn't do it with such brazenness. If what we are not able to achieve, what we have to ensure is make sure that we leave something behind that the generations can build on to improve it, and that's how society goes. If you look at the countries which we call, countries today that are supposed to be developed societies, they are also still improving. Who would have thought what happened in America would happen after 200 years? So I am saying that if he had cause to do this, he had the right because he was our leader and he was our founder. It means he still wanted us to improve upon whatever he had left behind.
And finally, as you were walking past his body, lying lifeless in the casket, what were the thoughts running through your mind?
Terrible. I will tell you, terrible. When I was entering here, my prayer was just that all what we were hearing from 12th November was not true. Terrible. Terrible, I will tell you, my dear sister. And I kept communicating in my heart to him that we shall continue to uphold, catch him, that we shall continue to uphold, that we shall continue to uphold whatever principles that he left with us, whatever principles he trained us in. I have worked under him as a deputy PND secretary. I've worked under him as deputy PND secretary for the Northern Region. I've worked under him as PND secretary for Northern Region for 7 years, the longest 7. I've worked under him as PND secretary for Labor and Social Welfare, which was called Mobilization and Social Welfare. I've worked under him as Trade and Tourism secretary. I've worked under him as PND secretary for CDR. I've worked under him as CDR general secretary, and I've worked under him as vice chairman. Catch him, please. I've worked under him as vice chairman, and I've worked under him as member of Council of Elders, and he was our chairperson. So you see that the greater part of my life has been with him. I have no reason whatsoever to depart from whatever he stood for, which I fought together with him. All right, I'll leave you to practice.
Thank you very much.
Well, Araba comes in with Hudu Yaya there trying to, get hold of Mr. Zotobi Kwachi earlier there. We'll be hearing from the NPP's chairman, Freddie Blay, who has also been paying his last respects. But just a few messages some of you have been sending through. It looks like most of you sent it at the time we're having the COVID-19 conversations, and it does look like a lot of you are interested in the hydrogen peroxide and how it can help reduce the vulnerability to COVID-19 infections. Well, before I go into that messages now, we can listen to Mr. Freddie Blay.
Past the body of President Rawlings lying in state there. What were the memories that went through your head as you looked at his lifeless body?
Mixed feelings. Let me be honest with you. Here lies a very pleasant man who is gone. He had the longest reign in this country, both as a military leader or a revolutionary leader. So, and then, of course, as a civilian ruler too. Think in a greater percentage of some of us, our youthful light, he was the man who was at the reign of affairs in this country. So, I will say, if I want to be very gracious to the memory, say that it's had a big impact on the life of this country, political life in this country. Of course, economic-wise, honestly, this country still remains what it used to be. Not much has changed. It means we need to take a second look as political leadership of not only Ghana, but of a greater percentage of Africa. Is it the leadership of an individual, or is it all of us together moving forward? But of course, moving forward, we need leadership. And I believe that's the role he had played in about 30 years of Israel in this country.
Of course, he was one of your biggest political opponents, but there are many who say that his impact cannot be forgotten. You agree?
Exactly, that's why I will come here. If I do remember, I've been in prison for at least a year in his reign. But I'm here today. That's history. At the end, till end of even when he was living, not as a leader, I could manage to converse, not only with him, but even more so with the wife. Was very pleasant, passionate, and could express his feeling. So we all need to come together, forget about the past. When we have the opportunity, we must be very, very, very measured in what we do, how we conduct ourselves, and then should not be too hard on our opponents. Because at the end of the day, we will end up what has happened.
Many talk about how he instilled the principles of probity and accountability into our governance. In your own opinion, what legacy does he leave behind?
As I said, I did phrase what I did tell you, that it's with mixed feelings. Probity and accountability was not invented. It's been there. Maybe he emphasized it more in terms of rhetorics. But this country still remained. Corruption from Adam to now, it's a problem the society has to face and deal with.
But you can't deny the fact that he tried to instill some integrity into our governance system.
I've not denied that. As a leader, he tried his best to do that. But as I said, these things have outlived him, as I talk to you now. So we as a society, it's not a strong personality, but strong institutions we need to build for our country. So that we don't believe in individuals that they can give us examples and leadership that will last forever. America even sometimes could even experience attempted coups and so forth and so on.
The NPP's chairman, Freddie Blay, there. Let me take a few messages so far. This one says, James from Sunyan says, please, how do we prepare our own, hydrogen peroxide is what you're talking about, to be used. Thank you very much for your message. This one says, even though he's lying in the casket, I still don't believe Papa J is gone. May his soul rest in peace. Thomas from Nalerugu says to ask Professor the percentage of hydrogen peroxide recommended for mouthwash per their research. Well, she's talking about a mouthwash that's already, I think, on the market. Some more of your messages here. Dr. Kwejo Yelaj says Rawlings has done and sacrificed so much for our dear republic. He ended up in a coup d'etat and gave birth to the Fourth Republic. He remains Ghana's most charismatic leader under the Fourth Republic. My condolences to the bereaved family and Ghanaians. You're texting from Kintampo North Municipality.